The night John Caneda chose his weapon for his sister's wedding, he didn't pick a soldier, a capo, or one of the untouchable socialites who threw themselves at his feet. He walked into the secure wing of his own safe house and pointed at the witness. Ella Wilson froze with a book in her hand, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Every nerve in her body went cold. Every breath caught in her throat. John Canada never explained himself. He never asked permission, and he never changed his mind once a decision was made. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. Now that you're settled in and ready for a quiet moment, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow brings another dark, thrilling story. Now, let's begin. The safe house was silent except for the hum of surveillance equipment monitoring the perimeter. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and Ella had been trying to distract herself with old paperbacks, trying to forget she was a prisoner pretending to be protected. She had learned to keep her head down in this place. She had learned that the less she said, the safer she stayed. But tonight, silence would not save her. John stood in the doorway, still wearing the tailored black suit from a meeting that must have ended badly based on the tension in his shoulders. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing tattooed forearms and a platinum watch that caught the dim light. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his jaw locked tight, and his gray eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. There was something different in his expression tonight, something that looked almost like desperation. "Mr. Canada," Ella managed, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. He studied her as if calculating a risk he had no choice but to take. Then he stepped fully into the room and tossed a black garment bag onto the narrow bed. "You," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "You're coming with me to my sister's wedding." Her stomach dropped. She had been wearing the same rotation of plain clothes for weeks now, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, no makeup, hands still trembling from the nightmares that woke her at 3 in the morning. She should not even be visible to a man like him, much less standing in the middle of whatever deadly game this was. She set the book down on the small table, afraid her hands might betray how terrified she actually was. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm a witness. I'm supposed to stay hidden." Arrivo Comey, John's underboss, appeared behind him in the hallway, arms crossed over his broad chest, eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. Even he looked unsettled by this decision. John moved closer, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. His presence filled the small room. "There's no mistake." Ella swallowed hard, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her mind raced through every possible reason he would drag her out of hiding. None of them were good. "Why me?" she asked, hating how weak her voice sounded. His gaze swept over her slowly, not with desire but with the cold assessment of a man selecting ammunition. She felt stripped bare even though she was fully clothed in an oversized sweater and worn jeans. "Because every woman who wants to be near me," he said, his tone flat, "wants something. Money, power, my name. A way into my world or a way to destroy it." She blinked, confused. "I don't understand what that has to do with—" "You don't want anything from me," he interrupted, his voice softening just enough to sound almost human. "You're the only person in this place who looks at me like I'm the monster I actually am. No pretending, no performance." Ella's heart pounded so hard she thought he might hear it. She had never heard him speak this openly. She wasn't even sure he was capable of honesty until this moment. Before she could form a response, an older woman appeared at the door. Mrs. Gianna Rossetti, John's late mother's sister and the family matriarch. She stopped short when she saw them, her sharp eyes narrowing. "John," she said carefully, her Italian accent still thick after decades in America. "Please tell me you have chosen an appropriate date for Ariana's wedding. The Langley family is already skeptical of this union. We cannot afford more gossip." He didn't look away from Ella. "I chose her." Mrs. Rossetti followed his gaze, saw Ella standing there in her plain clothes and bare feet, and her face went pale. "The witness?" she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. "You are taking the witness in protective custody to a wedding with 300 guests?" Arrivo coughed into his fist, poorly disguising a laugh. Ella wanted to dissolve into the floor. John's expression didn't change. "Ella Wilson will accompany me. But she is not one of us," his aunt insisted, stepping into the room. "She is evidence, John, and the people attending this wedding are—" "I don't care who they are," he cut her off, his voice carrying the kind of finality that made grown men stop breathing. "Mrs." Rossetti pressed her lips into a thin line, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, it looked like she might argue. Then she turned on her heel and walked out, muttering prayers in Italian under her breath. Ella released a shaky breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Mr. Kanata, I really don't think I should." "You're going," he said, lowering his voice to something almost gentle, though the steel underneath remained. "Unless you're refusing." Her breath stopped. Refusing him. Refusing the man who controlled every exit in this building. Refusing the Don of the Boston Mafia. A man who could erase people with a phone call. She forced her lips to move. "I'm not refusing. I don't understand why you need me there." He took one step closer, close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne mixed with gunpowder. His gray eyes held hers, and for the first time since she'd been placed in his custody, she saw something other than cold calculation. She saw fear. "Because tonight," he said quietly, "someone is going to try to kill me. And when they do, I need them looking at you instead." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ella stared at him, unable to process what he'd just said. He wanted her to be bait. He wanted her to be the distraction while someone tried to murder him at his own sister's wedding. "You want me to die for you," she whispered. "No." His jaw tightened. "I want you to live because of me. There's a difference." She looked at the garment bag on the bed, then back at his face. "What if I can't do this? What if I panic?" "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you survived before," he said. "And you'll survive again." Ella's throat closed. He was talking about that night. The night that had destroyed her entire life and landed her in this suffocating safe house for the past 8 months. The night she wished she could forget, but replayed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. 2 years ago, she had been a completely different person. A forensic chemistry student finishing her master's degree at Northeastern University. She had a small apartment in Alston, a part-time job at a campus lab, and a fiancé who promised her a quiet, stable future, Ryan Langley. She had loved him with the kind of blind trust that only comes from never having been betrayed before. She should have seen the signs. The late-night phone calls he never explained. The gambling debts he laughed off as bad luck. The desperation in his eyes when he asked her to co-sign a loan she couldn't afford. But she had been young and naive, and she had believed him when he said everything would be fine. It wasn't fine. One night in South Boston, Ryan told her to meet him outside a warehouse near the docks. He said he needed her help with something important. She went because she trusted him. She went because she loved him. And she walked straight into the worst mistake of her life. Ella blinked, pulling herself back to the present. John was still watching her, waiting for her answer. Arrivo had disappeared from the hallway, giving them privacy she didn't want. She looked at the garment bag again. "What's in it?" "Your armor," John said. Slowly she unzipped the bag. The fabric inside was emerald green silk, cold and smooth against her fingertips. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and it terrified her. "Tonight you aren't a witness," John said, his voice low and firm. "You're a weapon." Ella pulled the dress from the bag and held it up. It was elegant, off the shoulder, designed to make her unforgettable, designed to make her a target. "I need time to understand," she said, her voice shaking. "I need you to explain what's really happening." John moved toward the door, then paused. "Right now, I need you to walk. The rest, we'll handle in the car." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the dress and the crushing weight of a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Ella stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. But maybe that was the point. Maybe tonight she wasn't supposed to be Ella Wilson anymore. Maybe tonight she was supposed to be someone who could survive a mafia wedding and live to tell about it. 40 minutes later, Ella stood in front of the same small mirror, but the woman staring back at her was a stranger. The emerald green silk clung to her body like a second skin, the off-the-shoulder neckline exposing collarbones she had forgotten existed after months of hiding in oversized sweaters. Her dark hair had been pulled into a sleek low bun by a stylist who had arrived without warning, worked in complete silence, and disappeared just as quickly. The makeup was minimal but precise. Smoky eyes. Nude lips. Nothing that screamed for attention, but everything that made it impossible to look away. She looked expensive. She looked dangerous. She looked like she belonged to John Kanata. The door opened without a knock, and John stepped inside. He had changed into a different suit, this one charcoal gray with a black shirt underneath, no tie. His neck tattoos were visible above the collar, a deliberate choice. He wanted people to remember who he was, what he was. His eyes moved over her slowly, assessing, calculating. Then he nodded once. "Good, let's go." The armored SUV was waiting in the underground garage, engine already running. Erivo sat in the front passenger seat, turned halfway around to watch them as they climbed into the back. The door shut with a heavy thud that sounded like a vault closing. Bulletproof glass, reinforced steel. This wasn't a car, it was a moving fortress. John didn't look at her as the vehicle pulled out of the garage and onto the dark Boston streets. He stared out the window, his jaw tight, his hands resting on his knees. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, Ella couldn't take it anymore. "You said someone wants you dead. Who?" "I don't know yet," John said, his voice flat. "That's the problem." He turned to face her, his gray eyes sharp in the dim light. "But I know it's happening tonight. At the wedding. In front of everyone." Ella's stomach twisted. "How do you know?" "Because that's what I would do," he said simply. "A public execution sends a message. It shows weakness. It invites a war." He leaned back against the seat, his gaze never leaving her face. "Whoever it is, they want to humiliate me before they kill me. They want the family to see me bleed." She felt the weight of the dress suddenly pressing down on her. "And you're using me to flush them out. You're the anomaly," he said. "You don't fit. You don't belong. The second we walk in together, everyone in that room is going to be asking the same question. Who is she? That question will make people nervous. Nervous people make mistakes." Erivo glanced back at them, his expression unreadable. "Boss, we're 5 minutes out." John nodded, then turned back to Ella. "When we walk in, you stay close to me. You don't speak unless I tell you to. You don't leave my side. You don't react, no matter what you see or hear. Understand?" Ella's hands trembled slightly in her lap. She pressed them together, trying to steady herself. "What if I see him?" John didn't have to ask who she meant. "Then you look him in the eye," he said coldly. "And you smile." The estate appeared through the windshield like something out of a Gothic novel. Massive stone walls, iron gates, spotlights cutting through the darkness like prison searchlights. The SUV rolled to a stop at the main entrance, where a red carpet had been laid out and security stood in crisp black suits, watching everything. Camera flashes erupted as the door opened. Erivo stepped out first, scanning the crowd, then nodded. John exited smoothly, buttoning his jacket with one hand. Then he turned and extended his hand toward Ella. She hesitated for only a second. Then she took it. His grip was firm, grounding, as he pulled her out of the vehicle and into the blinding lights. The cameras went wild. Voices shouted questions she couldn't make out over the noise. John ignored all of it. He placed her hand in the crook of his arm and started walking toward the entrance. The massive oak doors groaned open, and the sound inside died instantly. 300 guests turned as one to stare. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables draped in white linen and covered in orchids. But Ella barely saw any of it. All she could feel was the crushing weight of hundreds of eyes on her body, judging, dissecting, questioning. John's grip on her hand tightened slightly. A warning, a reminder. She lifted her chin and forced herself to breathe. They moved forward, their footsteps echoing in the suffocating silence. Ella could feel the stares burning into her skin. Women in designer gowns whispered behind their hands. Men in tailored suits frowned, confused, suspicious. This was John Kanata's world, and she was the intruder. Then she saw him. Ryan Langley stood at the altar in a pale gray tuxedo, his blonde hair slicked back, his hands clasped in front of him. He looked every bit the charming academic he had always pretended to be. Clean-cut, respectable, harmless. But the second his eyes landed on Ella, everything changed. His face went white, his mouth opened slightly, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. His glasses slipped down his nose and he fumbled to push them back up, his hands visibly shaking. He recognized her. And in that moment, Ella knew John had been right. Ryan wasn't just a guest at this wedding. He was part of the plan. He was part of the threat. And now, seeing her alive, standing beside the most dangerous man in Boston, Ryan Langley looked like he was staring at a ghost. Ella didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just held his gaze as John led her down the aisle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. Ryan's hands gripped the edge of the altar to steady himself, his knuckles white, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. John leaned down slightly, his lips near her ear. "Good," he whispered. "Now he knows we're coming for him." John guided Ella to the front row with the kind of deliberate precision that made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. It was a strategic placement. He sat her down in the center of the pew, directly in Ryan's line of sight, impossible to ignore. Then he took the seat beside her, his body angled slightly forward, his presence a wall between her and the rest of the room. Erivo appeared near the altar moments later, positioning himself by one of the side exits with his arms crossed and that unsettling grin on his face. He wasn't watching the ceremony. He was watching the guests. Watching for movement. Watching for mistakes. The officiant, an older man with silver hair and a practiced smile, stepped forward and raised his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you would please take your seats. We are about to begin." The murmur of voices faded as guests settled into their chairs. The string quartet in the corner shifted into a softer melody, something classical and delicate that felt completely wrong for what was actually happening in this room. Ella's hands gripped the edge of the pew, her knuckles white beneath the silk of her dress. She could feel Ryan's eyes on her. She could feel the panic radiating off him even from 15 feet away. John leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper against her ear. "Hold his gaze. Make him terrified." Then he sat back, his expression neutral, as if he had just commented on the weather. Ella's pulse hammered in her throat, but she forced herself to lift her chin and look directly at Ryan. His face was still pale, his jaw tight, his hands trembling at his sides. He looked like a man who had seen his past come back to destroy him, and maybe that's exactly what she was. The music swelled, and the guests rose to their feet as the bride appeared at the back of the ballroom. Ariana Kanata was a vision in ivory lace, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, a delicate veil framing her face. She looked every bit the innocent princess, the beloved little sister marrying for love. But as she walked down the aisle on the arm of an older gentleman, Ella caught something in her expression. A sharpness, a calculation. This wasn't a woman lost in the magic of her wedding day. This was a woman executing a plan. Ariana reached the altar and took her place beside Ryan, who barely looked at her. His eyes kept darting back to Ella, his breath shallow, his composure unraveling with every second. The officiant began speaking, his voice warm and practiced, but Ella didn't hear the words. She was too focused on the memories flooding back, memories she had spent 2 years trying to bury. Ryan had been charming when they first met, funny, attentive. He had made her feel safe in a way she had never felt before. He had talked about their future with such conviction that she had believed every word. A small house outside the city, a dog, maybe kids someday. It had all sounded so simple, so normal, so far removed from the chaos of her graduate program and the pressure of her research. She had loved him because he made her feel like she didn't have to be perfect. She could just be Ella. But the man standing at that altar wasn't the man she had loved. That man had never existed. The real Ryan was a coward, a liar. A man so deep in gambling debt that he had been willing to kill the woman who trusted him most just to cover his tracks. She remembered the warehouse, the cold metal pressed against her spine, the smell of rust and seawater, the sound of his voice, shaking as he tried to explain why he had to do this. As if there was any explanation that could justify putting a bullet in someone you claim to love. The officiant's voice broke through her thoughts. "Ryan Langley, do you take Ariana Kanata to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Ryan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes were locked on Ella, wide and glassy, as if he were staring at a ghost he couldn't quite believe was real. The silence stretched on, awkward and suffocating. Guests shifted in their seats, confused. Ariana's smile tightened, her hand squeezing Ryan's arm in what looked like encouragement but felt more like a warning. "Ryan," the officiant prompted gently. Ryan blinked, finally tearing his gaze away from Ella. Yes, I do." His voice cracked on the words, barely audible over the low hum of whispers spreading through the crowd. The officiant nodded, clearly uncomfortable, and turned to Ariana. "And do you, Ariana Kanata, take Ryan Langley to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Ariana said clearly, her voice steady and cold. She glanced briefly at John, something unreadable passing between them, then turned back to Ryan with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The officiant continued through the rest of the ceremony, but Ryan never fully recovered. He stumbled through his vows, his voice shaking, his hands fumbling with the ring. When he finally slipped it onto Ariana's finger, his entire body was trembling. John's hand found Ella's beneath the cover of her dress, his fingers closing around hers in a grip that was both possessive and grounding. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes forward, watching Ryan fall apart piece by piece. But the message was clear. She had done exactly what he needed her to do. She had shattered Ryan's composure without saying a single word. And now, the real game could begin. The ceremony ended with polite applause and forced smiles. Guests filed out of the chapel area and into the grand ballroom where the reception had been set up with military precision. Round tables covered in white linen surrounded a polished marble dance floor. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting golden light over everything. A jazz quartet had replaced the string ensemble, playing something smooth and forgettable. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, the glasses clinking together like distant wind chimes. But beneath the elegance, Ella could feel the tension humming through the room like a live wire. John kept her close as they entered, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Eyes followed them everywhere. Whispers rippled through clusters of guests like poison spreading through water. Who was she? Where had she come from? What did she mean to John Kanata? The questions hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. Erivo appeared at John's side, leaning in to murmur something Ella couldn't hear. John's jaw tightened, then he nodded once. He turned to Ella, his gray eyes cold and focused. "Stay here. Don't move. I'll be back in 5 minutes." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with Erivo close behind. Ella stood frozen near one of the marble pillars, suddenly feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the dress. The emerald silk that had felt like armor in the car now felt like a target painted on her skin. She reached for a champagne glass from a passing waiter, more for something to hold than any desire to drink. The scent of lilies hit her suddenly, overwhelming and suffocating. They were everywhere, massive arrangements on every table, their white petals looking too much like funeral flowers. The irony wasn't lost on her. She tried to blend into the background, to become invisible the way she used to in the safe house, but it was impossible. Too many people were watching. Too many eyes tracked her movements. She took a slow breath and forced herself to stay calm. John had said 5 minutes. She could survive 5 minutes. Then she felt him before she saw him. That familiar presence that used to make her feel safe, and now only made her skin crawl. Ryan appeared beside her, moving quickly, his face still pale but his eyes sharp with desperation. He positioned himself between her and the crowd, blocking the view of most guests, his body angled toward the pillar like they were just two people having a casual conversation. But there was nothing casual about the way his hands trembled, or the sweat beading on his forehead. "Ella," he whispered, his voice tight and panicked. "You need to listen to me. You're in danger." She stared at him, her grip tightening on the champagne glass. 2 years. 2 years since she had heard that voice say her name. 2 years since she had trusted him with everything, and nearly died because of it. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Don't speak to me. I know you hate me," Ryan continued, ignoring her completely. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but you have to understand, I didn't have a choice." His eyes darted around the ballroom, checking to see if anyone was watching them too closely. "I was drowning, Ella. The people I owed, they were going to kill me. They said if I didn't handle you, they would make it worse. They would go after my family." Ella felt bile rise in her throat. Handle you, as if she had been a problem to solve instead of a person he claimed to love. "You tried to murder me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but sharp as glass. "You brought me to that warehouse and put a gun to my head." "I know," his voice cracked. "And I've lived with that every single day since. But I need you to know something. I wasn't working alone." He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further until it was barely a hiss. "The order didn't come from the loan sharks. It came from higher up. It came from him." Ella's heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" Ryan's eyes locked onto hers, desperate and pleading. "John Kanata. He was the one who wanted you dead, Ella. I was just the fool stupid enough to try and carry it out." The words hit her like a physical blow. She took a step back, her shoulder brushing against the cold marble pillar. "You're lying." "I wish I was," Ryan said, his voice trembling. "But I'm not. 2 years ago, Kanata was cleaning house. He was eliminating anyone who could connect him to a weapons deal that went bad. You were doing research at the university lab, remember? You were analyzing chemical compounds for a project. One of those compounds was part of his shipment. You didn't know it, but you had evidence that could destroy him." Ella's mind raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. She had been working on her thesis, analyzing trace chemicals in various substances. It had been academic, boring, nothing that should have put her on anyone's radar. "That doesn't make sense. I never saw anything suspicious." "You didn't have to," Ryan insisted. "Just the fact that you had access to that data made you a liability." Kanata gave the order. I was supposed to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But I couldn't do it, Ella. I couldn't pull the trigger. That's why you're still alive. The champagne glass shook in her hand. She wanted to throw it in his face. She wanted to scream that he was a liar, a coward, that nothing he said could be trusted. But doubt crept in like ice water through her veins. John had never explained why he kept her in that safe house. He had never told her the full story of why she needed protection. And tonight, he had brought her here as bait, as a weapon, with no regard for what it might do to her. He's using you, Ryan continued, his voice growing more urgent. Right now, in this room, he's using you to flesh out his enemies. But what happens when you're no longer useful? What happens when you become a liability again? His hand reached out toward her, but she jerked away. Come with me. Right now. I can get you out of here. We can disappear before he realizes you're gone. Ella looked past him, searching the crowd for John, for a Revo, for anyone who could tell her this was all a lie. But she saw no one. She was alone. And the man standing in front of her, the man who had nearly killed her once before, was offering her a way out while planting seeds of doubt she couldn't ignore. Before Ella could respond to Ryan, before she could decide whether to believe him or run or scream, a hand closed around her wrist. Firm, unyielding. She turned to find John standing beside her, his gray eyes locked on Ryan with the kind of cold fury that made the air feel 10 degrees colder. Ryan took a step back immediately, his face draining of what little color had returned. He opened his mouth to speak, but John cut him off with a single look that promised violence. The groom should be with his bride, John said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a threat wrapped in civility. Not bothering my date. Ryan swallowed hard, nodded once, and disappeared into the crowd like a man fleeing execution. John's grip on Ella's wrist softened but didn't release. Instead, he turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. Dance with me. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a request. It was a command delivered in the same tone he probably used when ordering someone's death. Ella's heart hammered in her chest, Ryan's words still echoing in her mind. John Kanata was the one who wanted you dead. But before she could protest, John was already leading her toward the dance floor, his hand sliding from her wrist to her waist with a possessiveness that made her breath catch. The jazz quartet shifted into something slower, something intimate, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. John pulled her into position with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to dance the way other men learned to fight. One hand settled on her waist, fingers splaying across the silk. The other captured her hand, holding it firmly against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm, steady and strong, while hers felt like it might explode. They moved together, falling into the rhythm without needing to speak. But Ella's mind was racing, Ryan's accusation tearing through every moment of trust she had started to build. She needed to know. She needed to hear it from John himself, even if the answer destroyed her. Did you order the hit on me 2 years ago? She asked, her voice low enough that only he could hear. John's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He simply continued guiding her across the floor, as if she had asked him about the weather. No. Ryan says you did? She pressed, her fingers tightening against his chest. He says I had evidence from my research. Chemical analysis that could connect you to something illegal. He says you wanted me eliminated. John's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that her words had any effect. Ryan Langley is a desperate man trying to save himself by turning you against me. He's a coward and a liar, and if you believe him, then he's already won. His hand at her waist pulled her closer, closing the distance between them until there was barely any space left. Think, Ella. If I wanted you dead, would you be standing here right now? Would you be wearing this dress, surrounded by my guards in the middle of my sister's wedding? She wanted to argue, but the logic was sound, too sound. Then why did he try to kill me? If it wasn't your order, whose was it? His own, John said simply. Ryan was drowning in gambling debt to people far more dangerous than me. He needed money. He needed a way out. And the easiest way to get that was to eliminate the one person who could testify against him if his criminal associations ever came to light. He spun her smoothly, and the room blurred around them. You weren't collateral damage in my war, Ella. You were collateral damage in his. She searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, any crack in the armor. But all she saw was cold certainty. How do I know you're telling the truth? Because I don't lie to people I need, he said, his voice dropping lower, softer. And I need you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she wasn't sure she wanted to unpack. His hand at her waist shifted slightly, his thumb brushing against the bare skin above the silk. The touch was barely there, but it sent heat racing through her body. "You're safe with me, Ella. Safer than you've been in 2 years." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "You brought me here as bait." "I brought you here as protection," he corrected. "The people who want me dead won't move if they think I'm vulnerable. But if I walk in here with a woman nobody knows, a woman who makes me look distracted, they'll get bold. They'll make their move. And when they do, I'll be ready." His gray eyes held hers, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something other than cold calculation. She saw fear. Not for himself. For her. "I won't let anything happen to you." "How can you promise that?" Her voice cracked slightly, the weight of the night pressing down on her. "How can you know I'll be safe when you don't even know who the threat is?" John stopped moving. They stood in the center of the dance floor, the music still playing around them, other couples swaying past, but it felt like they were the only 2 people in the room. He lifted his hand from her waist and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man like him. "Because anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first. And I promise you, Ella, nobody in this room is capable of that." The certainty in his voice should have terrified her. The possessiveness in his touch should have sent her running. But instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. She felt safe. She felt seen. And God help her. She felt wanted. Not as bait, not as a witness, but as something more. Something that had nothing to do with strategy or survival, and everything to do with the way he was looking at her right now. The music swelled, and John pulled her back into the dance, but this time it felt different. His hand at her waist was warmer, his grip on her hand was tighter, and when he looked at her, it wasn't with the cold assessment of a tactician. It was with the hunger of a man who had just realized what he was willing to destroy to keep her. The music ended, and John held Ella for a moment longer than necessary, his hand still resting on her waist as if releasing her might undo everything they had just rebuilt between them. Then he stepped back, his expression shifting back into the cold mask he wore for the rest of the world. But before either of them could speak, a voice cut through the low hum of conversation around them. "John, you didn't tell me you were bringing a guest?" The voice was light, almost musical, but there was something underneath it that made Ella's skin prickle. She turned to find Ariana Kanata standing at the edge of the dance floor, still wearing her ivory lace wedding gown, her dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. Up close, she was breathtaking. Delicate features, large brown eyes, the kind of beauty that made people instinctively want to protect her. But those eyes weren't soft. They were sharp, calculating, cold. John's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ariana, congratulations on your marriage." His tone was formal, distant, nothing like the warmth one would expect between siblings at a wedding. Ariana smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked at Ella the way someone might look at a stain on expensive fabric, with mild disgust and the immediate desire to remove it. "And who is this?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over Ella from head to toe. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Ella Wilson," John said simply, offering no further explanation. Ariana's smile widened slightly, but it only made her look more predatory. "Wilson. How?" "Common." She tilted her head, studying Ella with the kind of false curiosity that was really just thinly veiled contempt. "Are you family? A business associate? Or just someone my brother picked up for the evening?" The insult was barely masked, designed to make Ella feel small, insignificant, disposable. John's hand moved to the small of Ella's back, a subtle claim of ownership that didn't go unnoticed. "Careful, Ariana," he said quietly. "You're speaking to my guest." Ariana laughed, a light tinkling sound that somehow managed to be condescending. "Of course, I apologize if I offended." But her eyes said she wasn't sorry at all. She turned her attention back to John, dismissing Ella entirely. "I wanted to thank you for coming tonight. I know family gatherings aren't your favorite, but it means everything to have you here." She reached out to adjust something on his jacket, a sisterly gesture that felt wrong somehow. "Aunt Gianna was concerned about your choice of companion, but I told her you always know what you're doing." "I do," John said flatly. Ariana's hand lingered on his shoulder for a moment before she pulled back. And that's when Ella saw it. A bracelet on Ariana's left wrist, partially hidden beneath the lace sleeve of her wedding gown. It was delicate, gold, with 3 small charms hanging from it. A star, a crescent moon. and a tiny dagger. The kind of bracelet that should have been subtle, forgettable. But Ella's entire body went cold. She knew that bracelet. She had seen it before. 2 years ago. In the warehouse. In the darkness. She had been on her knees, Ryan's gun pressed against the back of her head, when she had looked up and seen someone else standing in the shadows near the door. Someone watching. Someone whose wrist had caught the faint moonlight streaming through the broken windows. The star charm had glinted. The crescent moon had flashed. And the dagger had twisted as the person moved, and then disappeared back into the darkness without saying a word. Ella had told herself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by fear. But it hadn't been. That person had been real, and that person had been Ariana. The realization hit Ella like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hands went numb. She forced herself to stay still, to keep her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. Ariana hadn't just known about the hit. She had been there. She had watched. She had let it happen. "Are you all right?" Ariana asked, turning her attention back to Ella with false concern. "You look pale. The excitement of the evening must be overwhelming for someone not used to this kind of event." There it was again. The subtle dig. The implication that Ella didn't belong. That she was out of her depth. But now Ella understood. Ariana wasn't just being cruel. She was testing, watching for recognition, watching to see if Ella remembered. Ella forced herself to smile, to play the part of the overwhelmed guest who didn't understand the games being played around her. "I'm fine," she said softly. "It's just a lot to take in." Ariana's eyes narrowed slightly, searching Ella's face for something. Then she smiled again, satisfied. "Of course. Well, I should get back to my husband. Enjoy the rest of the evening." She leaned in to kiss John on the cheek, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a threat. "We'll talk later, brother. There's so much we need to discuss." She walked away, her lace train trailing behind her like a ghost, and Ella finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. John turned to her immediately, his hand tightening on her waist. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "You recognize something?" Ella looked up at him, her throat tight. She couldn't say it here. Not in the middle of the ballroom with 300 guests and God knows how many of Ariana's allies watching. But she needed him to understand that everything had just changed. That the threat wasn't Ryan. It had never been Ryan. He was just a pawn, a disposable piece in a much larger game. The real mastermind, the person who had orchestrated everything from the beginning, was the woman in the white dress, the innocent bride, the beloved sister. The woman who had just walked away with blood on her hands and a smile on her face. "It's her," Ella whispered, barely loud enough for John to hear. "It's Ariana." John's entire body went rigid. For a moment he just stared at Ella, processing what she had just said. Then his expression shifted into something darker, more dangerous than she had seen all night. "Explain, now." Ella glanced around the ballroom, making sure no one was close enough to hear. "The bracelet she's wearing, gold with 3 charms, a star, a crescent moon, and a dagger. I saw it that night at the warehouse. Someone else was there, standing in the shadows by the door. I only caught a glimpse, but I saw that bracelet catch the light. I thought I imagined it, but it was her, John. Ariana was there when Ryan tried to kill me." John's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. His hand moved to the inside of his jacket, instinctively reaching for the weapon she knew he carried. But before he could speak, Erivo appeared at his side, moving quickly through the crowd with the kind of urgency that made Ella's stomach drop. He leaned in close to John, his voice barely audible over the music and conversation. "Boss, we have a problem." John turned slightly, his body still positioned protectively in front of Ella. "Talk." Erivo slipped a folded piece of paper into John's hand, his expression grim. "Intercepted message from one of the catering staff. They move at the toast." John unfolded the paper, read it quickly, then crumpled it in his fist. His gray eyes swept across the ballroom, landing on the head table where Ariana and Ryan sat surrounded by family and close friends. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Erivo said. "Ryan's supposed to give the first toast. It's tradition. Groom thanks the family, toasts the dawn." He glanced at Ella, then back to John. "If they're moving at the toast, it's happening in front of everyone. Public execution, maximum humiliation." John's hand found Ella's again, his grip almost painful. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, you stay within arm's reach. Understand?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The three of them moved through the crowd toward the head table, John's presence parting guests like a knife through water. The band finished their song, and the room settled into expectant silence. The best man, a nervous-looking young man Ella didn't recognize, stood and tapped his champagne glass with a fork. The crystal rang out clear and sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice wavering slightly. "It is my honor to invite the groom, Ryan Langley, to offer the first toast of the evening." Applause rippled through the ballroom as Ryan stood, his face pale and slick with sweat despite the cool temperature. He picked up his champagne glass with trembling hands, the liquid sloshing slightly. His eyes found John across the room, and something passed between them. Fear, resignation, desperation. "To the Kanata family," Ryan began, his voice shaking, "for welcoming me into your circle, for trusting me with your most precious treasure." He glanced at Ariana, who sat beside him with a serene smile that made Ella's skin crawl. "And especially to John Kanata, the dawn of this family, the man who holds us all together with his strength and his wisdom." Ryan raised his glass higher, and the entire room followed suit, 300 champagne flutes lifting in unison. "To family, to loyalty, to the man who protects us all." John stood at the edge of the head table, his expression unreadable. A waiter appeared at his elbow, offering him a glass from a silver tray. John took it, his movements controlled, deliberate. He raised the glass toward Ryan, acknowledging the toast. The room watched, waiting. This was the moment. The symbolic acceptance of the groom into the family. The public display of unity and power. John brought the glass toward his lips, and that's when Ella smelled it. Faint, almost imperceptible beneath the sharp effervescence of champagne and the heavy scent of lilies, but unmistakable to anyone who had spent years studying forensic chemistry. Bitter almonds, sweet and chemical and wrong. Cyanide. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She lunged forward, her hand striking John's wrist with enough force to send the champagne glass flying. It tumbled through the air in slow motion, the golden liquid arcing like a ribbon, before it hit the marble floor and exploded into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound shattered the silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the room erupted. Guests gasped, chairs scraped, voices rose in confusion and alarm. But Ella only saw John, his gray eyes locked on hers, understanding dawning across his face. "Bitter almonds," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Cyanide. I smelled it." John's hand moved to his jacket, and in one smooth motion he drew a matte black pistol. The movement was so fast, so practiced, that half the room didn't even see it until the weapon was already in his hand, aimed directly at Ryan. The groom stumbled backward, knocking over his chair, his champagne glass falling from his hand to join the wreckage on the floor. "Nobody moves," John said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The room went deathly silent. Erivo and 3 other men Ella recognized as John's security detail materialized around them, weapons drawn, forming a protective circle. Guests screamed. Some dove under tables. Others froze in place, hands raised, eyes wide with terror. This was no longer a wedding. This was a war zone, and the first shot had just been fired. John stepped toward the head table, his gun never wavering from Ryan's chest. "Who gave the order?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. He looked at Ariana, desperate, pleading. But the bride just smiled. That same serene, beautiful smile. And in that moment, Ella understood. Ariana wasn't afraid. She wasn't shocked. She was exactly where she wanted to be, in control. Watching her plan unfold, watching her brother realize too late that the greatest threat had been sitting beside him all along. John's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Erivo, clear the room. Everyone out except family." His eyes never left Ryan and Ariana. "And my date stays." Erivo moved immediately, barking orders to the security team. Within minutes, guests were being ushered toward the exits, some protesting, most too terrified to do anything but obey. "Mrs. Rossetti appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale, hands clasped in prayer. She looked at John, then at Ariana, and something in her expression broke. She turned and left without a word, as if she already knew how this would end. When the last guest had been escorted out and the ballroom doors sealed, John finally lowered his weapon slightly. But his focus remained sharp, predatory. "Ariana. Ryan. The library. Now." Ariana stood slowly, smoothing the lace of her wedding gown, as if she were simply excusing herself from dinner. Her expression remained serene, almost bored. "Really, John? You're going to ruin my wedding over a misunderstanding?" "Move," John said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Or I'll have Erivo drag you there in your wedding dress." Ryan looked like he might collapse. His legs trembled as he stood, his hands raised in surrender. "John, please. I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Save it for the library," John said. He gestured toward a side door that Ella hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a marble column. Erivo moved ahead of them, opening the heavy wooden door to reveal a hallway lined with dark paneling and antique sconces. They walked in silence, John behind Ryan and Ariana, his weapon trained on Ryan's back. Ella followed close to John, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might be sick. The library was exactly what Ella expected from a place like this. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, a massive desk made of mahogany. But what caught her attention was the thickness of the door, as Erivo closed it behind them, soundproofed. Whatever happened in this room, no one outside would hear it. Erivo turned the lock and positioned himself in front of the door, arms crossed, his expression cold and watchful. John finally holstered his weapon and turned to face his sister. "Talk." Ariana laughed. Not the delicate musical laugh she had used earlier. This one was sharp, cutting, real. "About what, brother? About how you've controlled every aspect of this family for the last decade? About how you've made every decision, taken every opportunity, claimed every victory while the rest of us just sit here and smile?" She stepped forward, her dark eyes blazing with a rage that had clearly been building for years. "Or should we talk about how you've turned the Kanata name into something people fear instead of respect?" "Careful," John said quietly. Ariana ignored the warning. "I'm tired of being careful. I'm tired of playing the dutiful little sister while you treat me like a child who can't be trusted with real responsibility." She gestured around the library, at the estate beyond. "This should have been mine too. Our father built this empire for both of us, but you took it all. You pushed me aside. You made me irrelevant. So you decided to steal from me," John said, his voice dangerously calm. "You used Ryan's shell companies to launder money out of the family accounts. How much did you take, Ariana? Millions?" Ariana's smile was cold and triumphant. "More than you'll ever recover. And by the time you figure out where it all went, I'll be on a plane to somewhere you'll never find me." Ryan's breath came in short, panicked gasps. "Ariana, stop. You said if we cooperated, if we just got through tonight." "Shut up, Ryan," Ariana snapped, not even looking at him. "You were always too weak to see this through." She turned back to John. "And you were too arrogant to see it coming. You thought bringing your little witness here would flush out your enemies. You thought you were so clever, but you never suspected me, your own sister." John's expression didn't change, but Ella saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. "I suspected everyone, including you." Ariana's smile faltered slightly. "Then why didn't you stop me?" "Because I needed proof," John said. "I needed you to show your hand, and tonight, you did." He glanced at Erivo, who pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A recording began to play. Ariana's voice, crystal clear, discussing account numbers and transfer schedules with someone whose voice Ella didn't recognize. The conversation was damning, explicit. Undeniable. Ariana's face went pale. "You were recording me?" "For 6 months," John said. "Every phone call, every meeting, every transaction." He took a step closer to her. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice millions disappearing from family accounts? Did you think I'd just let it go?" Ryan suddenly moved, his hand darting inside his jacket. He pulled out a small pistol, the kind easily concealed, and aimed it directly at John's chest. His hands shook so badly the barrel wavered. "I'm sorry," Ryan said, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, but she said if I didn't do this, she'd kill me anyway." Ella's breath caught in her throat. John didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared at Ryan with something that almost looked like pity. "Go ahead," John said quietly. "Pull the trigger." Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the click was deafening in the silent library, but nothing happened. No gunshot, no explosion, just a hollow, mechanical failure. Ryan stared at the gun in his hand, confused, terrified. He pulled the trigger again. Click. Nothing. John tilted his head slightly. Erivo swapped out the firing pins on every weapon carried by non-family security 6 hours ago. I knew someone would try something tonight. I just didn't know if it would be you or one of Ariana's hired guns. He stepped forward and plucked the useless weapon from Ryan's trembling hands. You were never going to win this, Ryan. You were dead the moment you agreed to her plan. Ryan collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Ariana stood frozen, her perfect composure finally cracking. She looked at John, then at Erivo, then at Ella. And in that moment, Ella saw the truth. Ariana hadn't just hated her brother. She had underestimated him, and that mistake had cost her everything. John stood over Ryan for a long moment, watching the man crumble on the library floor. Then he turned to Erivo and nodded once. Take him downstairs. We'll discuss his future in private. Erivo moved forward, hauling Ryan to his feet with one hand. Ryan didn't resist. He was beyond resistance now, beyond hope. As Erivo dragged him toward a side door Ella hadn't noticed, Ryan looked back at Ariana one last time, but the bride didn't even glance in his direction. She was too busy staring at her brother with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. You can't do this, Ariana said, her voice shaking for the first time all night. I'm family. Blood. You can't just... I can, John interrupted, his voice cold and final. And I am. He walked to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a single manila folder. He dropped it on the desk in front of her. Your accounts have been frozen. Every shell company, every offshore account, every safe deposit box, it's all locked. And the money you stole? It's being returned to the family as we speak. Ariana's hands trembled as she reached for the folder, flipping it open. Her face went from pale to ashen as she read the documents inside. Account statements, transaction records, evidence of every theft, every betrayal. This isn't possible. I was careful. I covered my tracks. You were sloppy, John corrected. You got greedy, and you underestimated me. He leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. I'm not going to kill you, Ariana. You're right about one thing. You are blood, and I won't spill family blood unless there's no other choice. His gray eyes hardened. But you are dead to this family. Your inheritance is gone. Your name is stripped. Your connections are severed. As of tonight, you are no one. Ariana's breath came in short, sharp gasps. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care, John said simply. There's a car waiting outside. It will take you to the airport. You have a ticket to London. One way. You have 24 hours to be out of the country. If you're still here after that, I won't be so generous. He straightened, buttoning his jacket with the same calm precision he had shown all night. And Ariana? If you ever come back, if you ever try to contact anyone in this family, if you even think about causing more problems, I will finish what I started tonight. Blood or no blood. Ariana stood frozen for a moment, her wedding dress suddenly looking less like a symbol of new beginnings and more like a burial shroud. Then she turned and walked out of the library without another word, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, each step taking her further from the life she had tried to steal. The door closed behind her, and the library fell into heavy silence. Erivo was gone. Ariana was gone. Ryan was gone. It was just John and Ella now, standing in a room that smelled like old leather and betrayal. John turned to face her, and for the first time all night, she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of what had just happened, the cost of being the man everyone feared. Come with me, he said quietly. He led her through another door, this one opening onto a stone balcony that overlooked the estate grounds. The night air was cold and sharp, cutting through the warmth of the library. The city lights of Boston glittered in the distance, a reminder that the world kept turning even when everything inside felt like it had just shattered and reformed into something new. John stood at the railing, his hands gripping the stone, his shoulders tight with tension. Ella moved beside him, close enough to feel his warmth but far enough to give him space. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then John broke the silence. I couldn't have survived tonight without you. Ella looked at him, surprised by the raw honesty in his voice. You would have figured it out. No, John said, shaking his head. I wouldn't have. I was so focused on external threats that I missed the one standing right beside me. Ariana played me perfectly. If you hadn't recognized that bracelet, if you hadn't smelled the poison, I'd be dead right now. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. You saved my life twice tonight. Once with your memory, once with your knowledge. I owe you everything. Ella felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked away for 2 years, buried under fear and trauma and the constant need to survive. You don't owe me anything. We're even now. You kept me alive when Ryan tried to kill me. I kept you alive when your sister tried to finish the job." John reached out and cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. The gesture was achingly gentle, completely at odds with the violence he was capable of. "You're not a witness anymore, Ella. You're not bait. You're not a weapon." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're mine, if you'll have me." Ella's heart hammered in her chest. She should run. She should take this opportunity to disappear while she still could. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the monster everyone else feared. She saw the man who had trusted her when he had no reason to. The man who had protected her even when it put him at risk. The man who had given her a reason to stop hiding and start living again. "I understood," she said softly, echoing the words from the car. But this time, they meant something different. This time, they meant she understood him. She understood them. She understood that this was no longer about survival. It was about choice, and she was choosing him. John pulled her into a kiss that tasted like champagne and danger and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Let's go home." They walked back through the library, through the empty ballroom where staff were already cleaning up the shattered glass and overturned chairs. They walked through the main entrance where the security team stood at attention, their eyes carefully averted. And when they stepped outside into the cold Boston night, when John's hand found hers and held it like he would never let go, Ella realized something. The silence that followed them now wasn't the silence of confusion or fear. It was the silence of respect, the silence reserved for power, for partnership, for the woman who had just become the queen beside the king. If this story of betrayal and power kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button. What would you do if you were forced to attend a wedding with your worst enemy? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to join the family for more dark romance stories.